Hey, everybody. This is Angela, your host of the Polymath Place podcast. And I am thrilled to have you all here today. Thank you for watching. We have an incredible guest with us today, Ackeem Salmon. And before we dive in, let me officially welcome you to my channel or the podcast. If you're new here, this is where we explore the intersections of learning, creativity, and the human experience through the lens of polymathy. We talk to extraordinary individuals who have navigated multiple fields and disciplines to achieve amazing things. So today, Ackeem, I'm so glad to have you. Can you go ahead and tell our listeners or viewers a little bit about your background, your achievements, and how you came to your polymath journey? Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'm Ackeem Salmon. I'm a multidisciplinary artist, and it's wonderful because working in multiple domains of visual and performance art, I navigate things more in the interdisciplinary aspects, how one blurs the line between the others. I'm originally from Jamaica, and a lot of things that I've been able to kind of explore is in context of cultural history, the things that I learned in school in terms of like what happened to Jamaica before independence, what happened to it in the terms of like, the impact of colonization, but like the reality of like, what is the language that we speak? For example, patois. Patois is a wonderful example of polymathy because it's such like an accumulation of so many different languages. Um, and over time, like as I've traveled, so now I reside here in Detroit, and I'm speaking with like a Midwestern accent. It's like adapting, but it's the cool part that my background in Jamaican speaking patois has built in that adaptation. So from here in the Midwest to French, there's all these different ways that has allowed myself to navigate this kind of like cultural complexity. So with my artwork, it's kind of seeing this lovely sea of like sea of melting pots of ideas, and essentially questioning the past, like how things really influence one another. Similar to ethnomusicology or anthropology, and how one person's life impacts another. I often kind of question that about my own life. What were my ancestors doing? How
Mhm.
did my genetics end up the way that they are today? Why am I curious in these fields? And really and truly, while I have the privilege of being alive, to find out those questions and to dive in that. So that's reflected
Yeah.
in my artwork in both like, what is visual, what is performance, and creating.
Yay, I love it. Well, thank you for that intro. I want to ask you a quick icebreaker question before we dive in. If you could master any skill or field overnight, what would it be and why?
Music theory. Um, why music theory? I would say because my entire background is in art and design. So, I started art in terms of, well, formal education, formal pursuit in terms of painting, drawing, all this sense of design. I mean, I definitely started music more intuitively, in Jamaica. So I'd be performing in like the choir, I'd be on TV, I'd be like in drama club, and it was always this moment that I would feel more spiritually and significantly of how to express my emotions through music. So, I mean, now in context of like, harp performance or violin, to the extent of work that I do, music theory is that skill set in terms of like sight reading, for instance. I think that's predominantly it. It's like, I'm able to read music and to follow, but being able to operate in context of like an orchestra, or like a larger to smaller ensemble, the skill set of like fully music theory in all its glory or all its like multi aspects become difficult. And it's also that thing that becomes interesting, and I kind of honor my pathway, like my non-traditional pathway,
Hmm.
because even though of course like I wish that like I get music theory all the way, it's like I can see the beauty of me approaching the harp as a painter, for instance, and the curiosity of like how I've been able to navigate these instruments in terms of physics, the same way how like I would, think of materials in painting, or materials in drawing, where how am I utilizing pressure on this pencil to create like a darker tone? How am I developing a stronger momentum to, create like a faster, heavier sound? So it's like this dialogue of like what is embodied intuitively to, what is embodied intuitively, and having the opportunity to express that in this like ephemeral way. So yes, the music theory, I think it's valid. It's a way that we learn. And, it's like you have many ways of looking at music. No way is right or wrong. I think there's always the situation and blame game to say no to that, yes to this. But I think, everything has its place, and I feel that it's one more thing that I look forward to learning.
Yay. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. Next, let's dive in to really highlight your multidisciplinary polymathic journey through the arts and beyond. So, what would you like our viewers or listeners to know about your particular journey, and in sharing your sort of non-conforming, zigzag, unconventional path? I think it really gives other people permission a little bit more. The more of us that are like non-conforming originals, the more it gives others permission to do that. So let's highlight some of your journey.
Oh yeah, what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna share this like little rich document. I mean, I made it so long ago, but I think it did a really great job in describing what I've been doing over the years. So we're gonna look on Canva for a wonderful moment. I click present. So I'm gonna just kind of briefly talk about like my practice. I haven't updated this. I think this was like from 2022, so 2 years old. So this is more like my research process, and how like I've been creating work over the years. So for instance, like work like this, I made in 2016, and really it's like that transition when I moved from moved from Jamaica to Detroit, and having the opportunity to really question what were those feelings. I feel it's like when we think of culture shock, there's always even things that I've been even questioning about myself, where I'm from Jamaica, a majority Black country, and then moving to America, it's like being even made more aware of my Blackness. So it's like things that you didn't pay attention to, and even realizing being able to contextualize those emotions. So a lot of the work that I, started to do is like this kind of performance. It's like, I would, sit down, drench myself in paint. Wonderful when like your parents walk in to your room and just kind of see you sitting there. Oh, exactly. However, it's the part where you get to question these kind of subconscious like feelings and emotions. So being able to kind of bring dialogue to many of these things, where I start to kind of look at like historical context, like where things exist in the past, and how am I utilizing, symbolism. Like for instance, I've been using this motif, this checkered body motif, in a lot of my work. And really at heart, it talks about duality, and often the duality within myself, where it is neither one or the other. There's often so many grays in my life. And, as an artist, we are being able to kind of like take these moments and ideas and put it into context to my to even how I experience thing in my own like modern lived experience. So even things with the checkered pattern where I'd question things of like, oh yeah, what was happening in the past? When you start to discover groups like the Abaqua group in like Cuba, like it's that Afro-Cuban group where, it was like this secret society of men, and this pattern comes up so often. And then I think to myself, I'm like, wow, I am definitely not the hypermasculine, serious guy that is expected to be in the Caribbean. And I exist in the extreme, in the just the opposite of it altogether. And being able to say like, what does it mean to be soft? kind? What does it mean to be, gentle? What does it mean for me to care? So being able to, take these like more, aggressive um, ideas that would appear, historically, and then question what does that represent in my life, and how do I take ownership of, things of the past. Um, and a lot of like the work that, I would do and, share like comes back to that whole thing about, questions of masculinity, questions of sexuality. Growing up in Jamaica, it's like the expectation is that you are supposed to, have many women. You're supposed to be this like aggressive, like kind of character that does not cry, does not show emotions. And even to be able to look at my adulthood now, it's like, no, I cry. How my relationship to women is very, respectful, where women and especially Black women have played such a critical role in making me the person I am today. And really being able to kind of question what like freedom has been kind of cultivated, over my life in these years. And I think even when I think about freedom comes with the whole thing of like kind of saying like F the system, but also kind of coming back to say like, what is polymathy? What is the ways that we innately are as human beings? And that's the things that I started to look at my own like, childhood growing up as these expectations of identities and being able to challenge all of those things. So, even in terms of like where the multidisciplinary comes in, it's being able to document my thoughts. And, for myself as a painter, but also as a photographer, it's been this process where I've been looking at how do I document like my writing and how I am experiencing life in that moment. And this is kind of even where the music theory kind of comes in. This is like my horrendous attempt at the moment, at that moment of like transposing my thoughts, where, the counts and measures aren't necessarily where it is, but it allowed me the space to develop that idea further. So, for instance, that work on my website, A Night in Blue, I believe I should be able to play it, and hopefully it plays well. This year, I've been able to take that work and write it for a cello, for instance, and like have a cellist play it. And that's me and harp accompanying that piece. So essentially with this work, it's like talking about my childhood growing up in Jamaica and moving to Detroit. And it's like the story of immigration and how complex immigration is. So each measure in this composition is like a line in the poem. And this is where the whole interdisciplinary aspect comes in. And it really kind of brings back into this like space where I'm able to question these inner dialogues. So even like when, I go back to the work, for instance, and, the photograph that this work is based on, it allows me to contextualize what is that specific emotion that I'm like feeling in that space and time. So yeah, that's like a huge like kind of background in terms of yeah, where I've come from. And then the more recent, I would say unpacking would be, as like I mentioned, the people that have inspired me in terms of like Black women, being able to even look at how that has lend itself to work like this, that I've been able to make in Detroit. And, this is after 10 years of being in Detroit and it being the space and time that has allowed me to nurture all these curiosities that this child from Jamaica started in high school, that was going to theater club, that was going to photography club. And, it's like all these things of like, what is potential? And then realizing, you find all these people that do have their specialization, but it's like they nurture that curiosity to the best that they can, but also connect you to others with the fields that they may not be as like experienced with. So yeah, I wanted to, as like that as like the general introduction, and then yeah.
Yeah. I love it. I love that your work evokes emotion
Mhm.
that brings attention to multifaceted polymathic journeys and like unconventional and like hodgepodge and difficult and questioning and intelligent human experiences. So I just want to say that first off. It begs the question for me, like, what do you think helped you embrace your own like very unique, diverse combination of like what you've become and who knows what you'll become next? Like what attitudes or experiences helped make you someone who wanted to be all these different things?
I think, and as like I'm getting older, it's like coming from a family of educators. And I think it's just the mere fact that growing up, despite how, of course, the social pressures, I think coming from a family, and especially my mom, it's like I think in the US it's like I think middle school to elementary, or maybe a little bit higher. And then my grandma was a vice principal. However, the nature that they always kind of imprint was like just keep learning. The whole aspect of, what does it mean to have information? And particularly my grandma would always embed this dialogue of wisdom and where does wisdom come from? And the reality is just comes from knowing, being able to explore things. And I think the I would say the beauty that I've received from my family is the support of dreaming. So it would often be a case where, of course, you'd have the one and two things of like, are you sure you want to do this? Do you want to switch your major to photography from advertising design? This is a whole real life situation, by the way. Are you going to get a job? That like, and it's all out of care and with all understanding, all families would do that for their loved ones. But at heart, it was always the case if like I ever had a dream, they would always say, just keep trying and keep working at it. And I think just hearing that one quote or that one progressive theme gave me permission to be like, oh, that means like, let me go join this club over here, or let me go do this. Or like if there are things and emotions that I things or emotions that I wasn't entirely, sure of, I would go ahead and, ask very critical questions. And that would just be like, okay, well, how do I, get the resources I need to be able to, uh, yeah, build the skill sets. And I think that's also with me as an artist. It's like, harp didn't start until I moved to Paris for the first time in 2017. And I didn't have like an intention to go play harp. It was literally, I did my first composition on violin. I think I showed up to a gallery one evening. I met these two other young people. And essentially, we also formed like this huge bond. But that bond ended up us performing together, where a friend was looking for like an opening act for their like theater performance, an exhibition. And I was like, yeah, I just wrote this like really cool piece of violin. So then they, eventually connected me to a dancer, Diane. And yeah, essentially Diane and Oceane was like, hey, would you like to play with the harpist? I was like, yes. So from that performance and hearing the harp, I was floored. I never heard these like range of emotions. It was like it took this one work on violin and then just hearing all of these like different arcs of emotions and dialogues. And then I just kept dreaming. I was like, I want to play harp one day. And the serendipity of it all, when I moved back to Detroit in 2018. I didn't know there were so many black harpists or harpists in Detroit. That was serendipity. So that was a serendipity where I asked questions, now learning that the fact, like, how do I get a harp? And it's not a straightforward thing. You don't walk into a store to say you just get a harp. It was more like, oh, okay, there is a harp store or harp center in Chicago. You should go. And then I did. And then here we are.
That's awesome. Well, I just want to circle back to what you said about like the educators in your family, largely women, it sounds like, who encouraged you to just keep learning. And that flavor of learning was more, it sounds like it was more about exploration, expression, unfolding, authenticity, and curiosity. It wasn't like the form of like memorize this and do what you're told and then you're educated. It was a freer version of becoming an educated person, which I really love.
Yeah, it definitely was. And it's like also, it's kind of interesting because, you'd have your family, but also I felt like other families started adopting me, or I kind of just imprinted myself on other families. So I ended up having a whole bunch of moms and just other people that ended up calling me their brothers and sisters. But they really kind of provided this space of permission. And I think that permission kind of gave me a form of pedagogy of like, okay, this is how things feel good to you. And it kind of started this like cycle of like, what is my like deeper intuition feeling or yearning to experience? And I think there's and I feel everyone has this kind of internal compass, like what feels right and what doesn't. And I feel that happens a lot with just art making, any form of art at all. And I think it's like I would be there to say, how did this medium allow me to communicate that story? Does it feel complete? Is it like finished? And I think that's the part, for example, going to an art and design university. So I graduated from College for Creative Studies here in Detroit. So I majored in photography, minor in fine art, no music, and these are the things where it's like, okay, I have a pretty grounding on design, but then there's something in terms of that space and time in memory. I'm like, okay, I can do as detailed drawings and I can make these complex illustrations. I can make them very poetic, but then is it telling the full story? So that's where I start to really think of the terms of sound and music, where it's a way of invoking this sense of memory that visual art doesn't do alone. So that space, that kind of itch where I'm like, how do I build this skill set so that um, I'm able to really get the full range of memory. So the story and my body and internal compass can be like, oh, okay, you've done it. Let's go. Mhm.
Yeah, trusting your own sense of judgment, your own
Mhm.
internal compass there. By the way, your art is gorgeous. I just want to like say, wow, like good for you. Well done. So cool. And I love your mixture, of like being involved in so many different versions of the arts and that it's so intelligent and thoughtful and uh, makes statements about culture along the way
Thank you.
as a form of pedagogy, as you said.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any other things you'd like to highlight or share with viewers and listeners?
Um, yeah, I feel in general, in terms of like outside of art, it's been a wonderful circle of experiences in terms of like language, being able to, experience, Jamaican culture, how it's transcended in just like what grounds my artwork in terms of like context and history. But then what did it mean to move to Detroit? And questions of my own identity there. So like for example, I'll do the whole switch. I think I did this with you. So like for example, like the mere fact that I can do this when I need to, or I can be like Michigan, where quand je parle français, c'est plutôt parisien. Tu français, franchement, je dois pas français. All these things. But it's like you're able to use the space and time and how it has impacted impacts the identity that's constantly evolving. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, and I think that's the part where, amidst the part of my artwork and getting to the place that I am, it's like realizing that my practice, me as a human being, is constantly evolving alongside my environment.
Yeah, exactly. I had this realization recently that the the best polymaths are self-evolvers. They're constantly becoming new, better, different versions of themselves.
Mhm.
And that's what good artists do too. They evolve themselves and express and explore the human experience. And so, yeah, I just wanted to point that out that like life itself is artistic expression, especially for polymathic types of people, right? All right. Well, if you're feeling ready, I'd like to propose that we move on to the lightning round. Are you
Yes.
feeling ready? Okay. So, the lightning round is a time near the end of our conversation where I'm just going to ask you some quick questions and you just answer them as quickly as possible before we wrap up. Okay. Question one. What is the best book you've read recently?
Uh, the best book that I've read is by Waka Samit.
Okay.
Yeah,
Nice. The Polymath.
yeah, The Polymath. I think for me, that book has been, I think it's such a thorough book in context.
Hmm.
And I feel like for many of us who don't have many examples, this was even myself, where I'm like, there's often not a place where I exist. I often have to do the hat thing. It's like I'm this hat this day, this hat. And it's never been this space where, oh, you're Akeem Salmon. Let me take all of you. Um, However, to even learn so much about, people of the past, that book is really, really brilliant to bring up people that, you wouldn't even think. And especially like Black polymaths. And even like the reality is like, you think of like, Black women, and I bring Black women up because it's like, there's this Western idea that presents polymathy as snobbish. And largely, if you look at the polymath that haven't recorded, it's predominantly white men. Uh,
Hmm.
and the reality is that polymathy is a fundamental human framework. And if you even look at Black women are inherently polymathic. In general, us as human beings, that's where our heart relies. So that book is a really good book. So Waka Samed on the Polymath is really
Yay. Yes. And I, just for the record, part of what I'm trying to do is democratize and modernize polymathy. So it's not just associated with like dead white dudes from history. And
yeah.
Wackus's book did a great job of like really listing people
Mm,
from history from all different cultures. So it's a major contribution. All right.
yeah.
Next lightning round question. What's one piece of advice you'd give to aspiring polymaths?
Keep trying. I feel like keeping curious, like curious, and I would say, and I think that's probably the expected thing, but I feel like being okay with the process of becoming. I think that's probably the best, more down to earth response. Because I feel there might be an of being polymathic that you have to do everything exponentially well. However, I feel the gentleness of seeing the process of you and being true to that, finding the resources that make sense to you, and giving you the space and time to sit down with those and make it make sense in your own life.
Yeah, I love that piece of advice because a lot of very capable, competent, polymathic, lifelong, life-wide learners are used to being excellent at things. And if you really want to lean into your polymathy, you got to sometimes just be bad at things
Mhm.
so that you can gain skill in those
Right.
areas. Yes.
Exactly.
So you got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable a little bit
Oh
too.
God, it's the same thing with like harp and violin. It's like, in the beginning I was getting like warts and pusses in my fingers and I was like, this is hard. But then after you realize like, oh, okay, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and you're getting all these systems.
Yeah, for sure. Next question. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why?
Any historical figure. I feel like I would just like to vibe out with Leonardo da Vinci just for a quick moment. I would just be like, okay, dude. Just walk me through a few things. Let me get this book of yours, but also let me see your paintings, but also tell me about your books. Um, yeah, I think in terms of history and in context to just my life currently, I feel like I would want to just sit down and have like a good coffee with them.
Great answer. I love that. Okay, last question of the lightning round. What is next on your journey?
What is next on my journey? I am currently a lot more community work. So the whole part of my chapter is that I run a nonprofit, a 501(c)(3) called Mirror Glass Inc. Ensembles for the Collaborative Arts. So it's where we start to look at arts outside of the institution. How do we create spaces for artists to be interdisciplinary? How do we provide access and opportunities and remove barriers to pursue different art forms or even access certain dream ideas? So really, truly, it's like, my practice at heart because there have been so many barriers to do things. Even right now, like I'm renting a harp and like, trying to figure out like how to, acquire things that I need to keep learning. But yeah, I would say building that as like the next chapter of how can I contribute to making art accessible, where seeing a harp or hearing stories like mine doesn't become like a once in a lifetime, or you have to go to a museum or go to a full art and design school to learn about these things. So that's essentially, yeah, the next chapter.
Oh, I love that. That's excellent. I love that you're infusing meaning and purpose into your exploration of, how to be in the world and how to contribute to it along the way. Well, this has been so interesting, Akeem. Thank you so much for coming on the Polymath Place podcast YouTube channel. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your story and your experiences with the audience here. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And everybody, stay curious, keep learning, and I will see you next time at Polymath Place. All right, take care, everybody. Bye.